As many of you know, the US is currently dominated by a two-party system, the two major parties of the United States being the Democratic and Republican parties respectively. However, what most of you don't know is that the US has a fair share of third parties as well, and for those of you who do know of them, you may more than likely believe that they are spoilers or wasted votes or don't stand a chance. Well, I'm here to show you 10 times they did stand a chance. So grab your Gadsden flags and nadir signs, because here are the top 10 third-party performances post-1900 reduxed. Number 10. Third parties who received faithless electors. Faithless electors are defined as members of the United States Electoral College who do not vote for the presidential or vice presidential candidate for whom they have been pledged to vote for, even if it may be illegal for them to do so. Sometimes it's out of necessity, sometimes it's by accident, but a majority of the time it's used to spread some sort of political message. Nowhere is that more prevalent than when a person decides to cast their ballot for a third party or independent candidate, which in recent history has happened 2.5 times. Now, you could technically make the case that these three should be higher, considering some of the people on this list don't even have electoral votes, but these guys do. But as a populist, I'm using the popular vote system on how I rank the candidates. And these guys, sadly, didn't get that many. The first person in this mini list is John Hospers, the Libertarian Party candidate for president in 1972. And somehow the Libertarian Party started out really strong by getting a faithless elector, Roger McBride, to cast his ballot for them instead of voting for Richard Nixon. This vote was interesting not only due to the fact that the Libertarian Party managed to get one elector in its first election, but also due to the fact that his VP candidate, Tony Nathan, was the first Jewish person and the first woman to get an electoral vote, and allegedly, John Hospers was the first LGBTQ person to receive an electoral vote. That rumor is a little unsubstantiated, but it's good to give the Libertarian Party something. And this wouldn't even be the last time Roger McBride would be involved with the Libertarian Party, as he would become their nominee in 1976. Speaking of libertarians, Ron Paul, the father of libertarianism to an extent, also got a faithless elector, not in any of the elections that he actually ran for, but in 2016. Where a Texas elector who was supposed to vote for Trump cast his ballot instead for Dr. No. He was even invited on Ron Paul's show to explain why the heck he did so. The last one only half counts, and that is because it was Bernie Sanders, who is both an independent senator from Vermont and was a 2016 Democratic presidential candidate. So you can both classify him as a third-party W, but also just consider it to be one of those people who voted for a loser in a primary. What separated Bernie from Paul was the fact that Bernie actually managed to get some general election votes in 2016, because there was a subsection who were too Bernie for bust even for a majority of the Bernie or bust movement. I guess the winner of the ultimate Bernie or buster is David Mulinix from Hawaii, who decided to cast his electoral vote for Bernie Sanders as opposed to Hillary Clinton. Guess you still needed ointment for that burn. Number 9, Strom Thurmond, Dixiecrats, 1948, an American politician who served as the 103rd governor of South Carolina and would later serve for 48 years as the state senator, starting out as a Democrat, then later becoming a Republican. But the thing that earned him that Senate seat that he would serve for the rest of his life in was his 1948 presidential bid, where he led many Southern Democrats to leave the Democratic Party, since more and more Democrats like Harry Truman were becoming more in favor of the Civil Rights Movement, and founded the States' Rights Democratic Party, better known as the Dixiecrats, a conservative, pro-segregationist states' rights party. States' rights to do what? Well, I think we all know. Strom, as their nominee, managed to get 2.41% of the popular vote and 39 electoral votes. But in a way, you can say that this actually doesn't count, because in a lot of those deep southern states, Strom was the official Democratic Party nominee, so technically, he was running a major party bid. Semantics, I know. And it was due to this major split off from the right side of the Democratic Party, as well as a similarly sized split of the left side of the Democratic Party, that led to many people to believe that Harry Truman would end up losing 1948, but this election ended up becoming the definitive proof that the spoiler effect doesn't exist, at least in general elections. And if you need further proof, number 8, Ralph Nader, Green, 2000, American political activist, author, lecturer, and attorney, noted for his involvement in consumer protection, environmentalism, and government reform causes. Nader was courted by multiple left-wing parties to run for president since 1972, but didn't actively seek the presidency until 1996, when many state affiliates of the Green Party decided they were going to have Nader run as their candidate. But Nader didn't make much of an impact until the following election, when those state parties decided to coalesce into a formal nationwide party, amassing a grand total of 2.74% of the votes. But one problem was that 97,488 of those votes were in Florida, votes that if they went to Gore, he would have won, ignoring the fact that the margin was so small you could literally pin the blame on any of the other candidates, and there were tons of other problems with Florida's elections. But as the saying goes, you nip it in the bud. And nipped the bud was, as the reputations of Nader and the Green Party were completely destroyed, even to the point where the two didn't want to work with each other for the next two elections when Nader ran 2 more times. Number 7, Gary Johnson, Libertarian, 2016, an American businessman, author, and politician. He served as a Republican governor of New Mexico, later running for the presidential nomination in 2012, but he dropped out rather early on to pursue the nomination of the Libertarian Party, getting a pretty distant third. But much like Nader, he didn't make much of an impact until the next election, where dissatisfaction between Trump and Hillary made many people start looking to Gary Johnson a lot more seriously, to the point where he was only 5 percentage points away from getting into the CPD-sponsored debates. But unfortunately, he wasn't able to maintain that momentum due to many campaign gaffes, leading to his numbers dropping and only getting 3.28% of the votes. He became so irrelevant that he wasn't even put in the top 10 list of scapegoats Hillary used when she lost. It was a low threshold and he couldn't even make that. Number 6, Eugene V. Debs, 1900, 1904, 1908, 1912, and 1920. An American Union leader, Debs was one of the founding members of the Industrial Workers of the World, as well as many other endeavors we'll get into. He is considered by many to be one of, if not the, father of American socialism, who ran for president a grand total of 5 times. In 1900, he ran for the short-lived Social Democratic Party of America, which he would then reform into the Socialist Party of America, and became its candidate for president for every election up until his death, with the exception of 1916. Fun fact, that final campaign he ran while he was in prison for standing up against World War I, and while that one he managed to get the most votes, the one election that he had the most impact in was the infamous 1912 election, where he managed to get 5.99% of the vote, which, while still pretty far away from number 3, not by that much. There were even some areas where Debs actually managed to outdo some of the major party candidates. The reason being that this election happened right smack dab in the middle of the progressive era, which led to issues that Debs had been fighting for long before they were popular to enter the mainstream, which made many people actually start to give Debs a second look. And if you think my description is rather lax, I have a video about Debs that probably deserves the same treatment I'm giving this video, and I have a video about his party. Number 5, John B. Anderson, Independent, 1980, Republican congressman from 1961 to 1981, made the decision in 1980 to run for his party's nomination for president, running as a centrist or Rockefeller Republican as he had been for a majority of his political career, managing to get a pretty close third. Not being satisfied with who the Republican Party chose instead of him, he decided to continue his bid as an independent, gaining 6.61% of the popular votes, even gaining the distinction of being the first independent candidate to be invited to an officially sanctioned debate. However, he had only managed to debate his former party member, Reagan, as Carter didn't want him invited because he was worried that the anti-Reagan vote could be split. If you want to learn the full story of Anderson, I have a video about him as well. Number 4, George Wallace, American Independent Party, 1968, the 45th governor of Alabama, having served 2 non-consecutive terms and 2 consecutive terms as a Democrat. Wallace is best known for his reactionary Southern neo-Dixiecrat ideals during the 20th century, particularly in regards to the Civil Rights Movement, declaring in his 1963 inaugural address,
"And I say segregation now, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever."
He was a U.S. presidential candidate for 4 consecutive elections, first trying to run a Don Quixote primary bid against LBJ in 1964, before deciding that he was going to run in 1968 under the third party, the American Independent Party, a far-right paleoconservative segregationist political party founded 1 year prior. I have a video on that party as well. You know what, I should just flat out say that a majority of the stuff that I covered in this video I've already expanded upon in their own individual videos. Since there were a lot of backwards rednecks in the South, he managed to receive 13.5% of the popular vote and 46 electoral votes. However, he merely served to just make Richard Nixon sound less racist. Funnily enough, he would end up seeking the presidency again in 1972, this time as a Democrat, under the pretext that he had some sort of spiritual awakening, and the racism was gone. He would then end up getting shot and paralyzed.
Ha ha! His legs don't work no more!
Despite this, he would end up running for the presidency one more time, and thankfully, he never won. Number 3, Robert M. La Follette Sr., an American Republican and progressive politician. Fighting Bob would represent Wisconsin in the House, Senate, and governorship. Being an incredibly outspoken progressive Republican for most of his political career, he would end up becoming well known to a majority of the population, even managing to become regarded as one of the best senators in US history, at least according to a ton of historians. But he was not one to follow the crowd, as he would even go toe-to-toe with other so-called progressives because he felt that they weren't correct on a lot of issues, particularly in regards to foreign interventions. This would in turn lead to him seeking his party's nomination for president a couple of times, mainly becoming a favorite son for his home state of Wisconsin. But after a couple of tries, he started thinking, maybe the Republican Party isn't the best vehicle for progressives. So he would in turn decide to leave the Republican Party and form his own political party known as the Progressive Party, which is ironic considering a couple of years before then, he was on the exact opposite end of this issue. Though I guess it really had to do with who was the person running. And I think one thing that set this party apart from the other one was that this party was both more and less ambitious. Less in the sense that he only wanted to run the candidacy for president and not run any down-the-ballot candidacies, but more in the sense that he wanted to bring people outside of progressive Republicans within the party, Democrats, socialists, but not communists. He would earn a grand total of 16.61% of the popular vote and 13 electoral votes, all from his home state of Wisconsin. So even in the end of the day, he was still their favorite son. Number 2, Henry Ross Perot, independent, 1992, an American business magnate who at the time of his death had a net worth of $4.1 billion. Back in the 90s, Ross Perot was growing dissatisfied with how the United States political system had been run up to that point, seeing it as too partisan, and mostly serving the interests of billionaires like himself. So he decided one day to cut out the middleman and decide to run his own candidacy for president as a centrist-oriented independent outsider, focusing his campaign on balancing the budget, furthering economic nationalism, strengthening the war on drugs, and implementing electronic town halls throughout the nation to promote direct democracy. And many people agreed with Perot and decided to give his candidacy a shot, giving him just enough support to get into the presidential debates with Bill Clinton and George H.W. Bush, the only time in recent history that a general election debate was held between 3 candidates as opposed to 2. By the end of the election, he managed to get 18.91% of the votes. So interesting, considering Perot actually dropped out during the candidacy and then re-entered the race later. That shows how much people were actually willing to hear Perot out. Afterwards, he would decide to form a political party to try and push for his agenda, the Reform Party, and if you want to know more about that, before I unveil number 1, here are 4 honorable mentions. John G. Schmitz, American Independent Party, 1972, with 1.42% of the votes. Jill Stein, Green, 2016, 1.06% of the votes. Joe Jorgensen, Libertarian, 2020, 1.18% of the votes. And lastly, Henry Agard Wallace, Progressive Party, 1948, with 2.37% of the vote. Number 1, Theodore Roosevelt, Progressive Party, 1912, an American statesman, author, explorer, soldier, and naturalist. Oh, and I forgot to mention, he was the 26th President of the United States from 1901 to 1909, serving under the Republican Party. Due to the fact that he served essentially McKinley's full second term, and then got another term for himself, he decided that essentially counted with the two-term precedent. But in order to make sure that his ideal version of America continued, he would push for his Secretary of War, William Howard Taft, who was essentially his protege, to run in his stead. However, Taft would then make a shift to the right, which made Teddy go, you know what, screw the two-term precedent. I'll just run a third time. I know people want me to. And want them to he did, as he managed to win the Republican primaries. However, the primaries, especially back then, were more of just a popularity contest. And parties literally don't have to follow the primaries at all. So they instead just gave the nomination to Taft. Seeing this process, Teddy got so mad that he decided to take all of his supporters and then leave to create their own political party known as the Progressive Party, but you might know them as the Bull Moose Party. That name coming from the very infamous incident where Teddy Roosevelt got shot.
Ladies and gentlemen, I don't know whether you fully understand that I have just been shot, but it takes more than that to kill a bull moose.
Which schools won't teach you actually came from this presidential run. What schools also won't teach you is that Roosevelt actually managed to win second place in this race, with 27.4% of the popular vote and 88 electoral votes. This would be the last time that a third-party candidate manages to get anything higher than third, at least on the presidential stage. So yeah, hope you enjoyed me remaking my first ever YouTube video on this channel for this channel's 5th anniversary. And let me know if there's any other videos that you might be interested in seeing me give a redux to, as not gonna lie, some of these really could use some polish. Hard to believe that we got this far. Well, okay, that's a little much. I mean, not much really happened in the 5 years since then. I'm still here making the same kind of content that I made 5 years ago to an audience that isn't really that big compared to 5 years ago. There are a lot of creators that started later than me that have gotten tens and thousands of more followers and clicks and views. In fact, I'm literally kind of in a worse position considering I'm literally making a video I've already made before. Okay, that's proof that I've improved. If I can remake a video that I made in the past and give it better polish, then that's proof that I've gotten better, right? But then what's the point in making what I'm making now if I'm eventually going to outgrow it and think that it's garbage? Am I just going to go back and make all of these old videos again? When 5 more years come and go, am I going to be in this exact same spot? 17-year-old me definitely didn't think so. The fuck am I even Wait, is this thing still